Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second in the Urban Living webinar series. Today we have an extremely topical subject, the future of work. The way that all of us have been affected in the way that we work by the COVID pandemic. It's possibly for good, you know, some of these changes are possibly going to be permanent. So we have an awful lot to talk about today. Justin, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So today we are going to have a 40 to 45 minute discussion with our panelists. Everybody else is on mute, but you can communicate with us via the chat function. So if you have questions, please submit them in there, and we'll do our best to get through them towards the end of the session. Next one, please, Justin. So that's me. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media. We are an online publisher. We have websites called Service Department News, Boutique Hotel News, and Short-Term Rentals. We're also an events organizer. We have various events for the hospitality and real estate sectors. And these webinars are a precursor to a new event which we're launching in London in November this year called the Urban Living Festival. Next one, please, Justin. So we have an august panel here with us today. All these guys have different specialities and are coming at the subject from a slightly different angle. Next one, please, Justin. I'll ask them to introduce themselves shortly. The session is being recorded, so everybody who's registered will get a recording at the end in case you miss some of the session. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context about what we're going to be discussing. There's a general feeling that the global work from home experiment, as it's being called, has been successful and will probably change attitudes on how we work permanently. Some quite startling quotes being thrown about at the moment. You can see some of these here. I mean, companies that had enormous workforces in the office are still functioning effectively with a skeleton crew in the office and thousands of other employees working from home. Google is giving employees $1,000 each to buy furniture to work from home. Facebook and other Silicon Valley companies have said that a large amount of their workforce could be working from home permanently. Next, please, Justin. And it's not just companies of the Silicon Valley ilk. Law firm Slater and Gordon have said that remote working for almost 2,000 staff will become the norm rather than the exception once the pandemic ends. There are issues to overcome if that's going to be the case. If you've ever tried to have a Zoom call from somewhere extremely rural in the UK, you'll realise that it's not quite as easy there as it is for everyone. And business travel is also going to be affected. We've got different lockdown restrictions, quarantines, travel restrictions in different countries. They're all going to be lifted at varying rates, which is giving us a confused picture for business travel and when that's likely to continue. Just before we kick off, our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time, if you can scroll on, Justin, there we go, is about investor sentiment to various hospitality and real estate asset classes. We've got a great panel who you can see there. And the link to sign up for that one should be in the chat function. So, with that all out the way, let's ask our 4 panelists to introduce themselves. Now, I can see you all in a kind of tower view. And Giles, you're at the top. So would you like to go first?
Thanks, George. I'm Giles Fuchs. I'm CEO and founder of Office Space in Town, OSIT. We're a serviced office company, predominantly in London, with about 3,000 people working at our desks. I've recently been invited to advise the government of how to get back office workers safely.
Thank you. Sean. Sean, you're muted.
There you go. It's probably the best way for me anyway to be muted.
Try
My
again.
wife says that all the time. It's great to talk to everybody in the land of digital connection. And I'm Sean Worker. I'm with T5 Strategies, Managing Director and Principal. And we're an international advisory firm, and we work in, how to optimize the future for business and businesses in the travel and hospitality sector. And we specialize additionally in change management, special situations, administration and restructuring. And I'm talking to you from Spain, and it's beautiful weather.
Thank you, Sean. Carol, would you like to go next?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here. I'm Carol, the Global Travel Manager for Fidelity. Most people that I speak to that say, when I say I work for Fidelity, they immediately say, I have my pension with Fidelity. So most people know who we are. I've been with the company for going on 3 years now, and looking forward to all the questions that you're going to present today.
Thanks, Carol. And last but not least, Jack.
Oh, I wish I was talking to you from Spain, but I'm coming to you from grey Walthamstow. But Nuveen, in short, is the investment management arm of TIA. So it's one of the larger asset managers in the world. And Nuveen Real Estate is a top 5 real estate investment manager. So managing a kind of house capital of TIA as well as third-party investment. And I run innovation for the company, which really means partnering with our investment teams across the US, Europe, and APAC. And on kind of asset classes from office, retail, housing, and logistics.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you. So I'd like to kick off by talking about the changing role of the office and what are our best guesses as to how many people who have been working full-time in an office before the current situation are likely to go back. I know my wife, for example, works for a big media company, a publisher in London. They've already offered her the option to work from home full time and not go back at all. And I think she's going to take them up on that option. And there are plenty of other companies in that boat. Carol, before we get onto the business travel piece later, what about how Fidelity, as a financial institution, is looking to handle this? How do you think your staff will go back? How many and when?
Well, I mean, I actually sit in the corporate property services area, and although most of my work is around travel, obviously, I am party to some of the discussions, and although I'm not close to the detail, the company has recently sent out a survey to the staff to try and get some sort of feedback on whether people want to come back to the office, and if they do, is it going to be part-time, full-time, etc. And I sense that one of the main reasons is not only to find out how many people want to come back, but how we're going to manage in terms of the space. From what I'm hearing, I get the impression that there will be an A and B team, and it will be mainly front office staff initially, and it will be based on a percentage of people that want to come back, and the office space will be positioned around that A and B team and the numbers, and then it will be phased in terms of the additional staff, so the back office, more admin staff, and as to whether they come back and the number of days that they work. The other thing is that we've been told that we don't have to come back to work in the office, so that's going to be a change as well. But as to whether that is how we look today and longer term, that might change, don't really know, but that's the position. We're being asked, do you want to come back? There will be an A and B team, and then it will be phased across the whole company globally. But in Asia, there's quite a lot of people in particular China, that have already gone back to work and is working out of the office as opposed to being at home. So I think it has a lot to do with your setup, mindset in terms of commuting into the office, as to whether people will even want to come back. But the company is giving us choice at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm. Giles, as a manager of an office space, are you getting much of an indication from your clients as to the potential demand to come back?
Yeah, I just want to go to your first thing you said, George, what I think was right, which is guess. Obviously, the gift of prophecy was not given to man. So everything that us four say, or anybody else, is a best guess of the future. And I think it's going to change very, very quickly, like it did when we went into COVID. I think coming out of COVID, it's going to move quickly. So everything we say today may change tomorrow. But yes, like Carol, we've done a survey of our clients. The predominant overview is that our clients want to come back to work, but they want more flexibility. So if I was going to jump to the end, my line would be, people are going to come to the office, but they're not going to come to the office every day. Interestingly, I don't know of the lots of hundreds of people on the call at the moment, how many people were already working at least a day a week at home. I know I was, and I used it for catching up on all the emails and stuff, the mountain of emails that I couldn't get through. So I think if I'm going to jump to the end, and where our clients are today, then we're going to come to the office because we need it, and I no doubt we'll move on to that later in the discussion, but we might not be coming every day.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Jack, as an owner of office real estate in London and elsewhere, how are you guys gauging the potential demand for coming back, and what would be your best guess at how workforces are likely to be reduced when they do come back?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this has been a conversation for us as a business and as an office team, ever since this started, obviously. I think just to reiterate what Giles said, I think especially when we talk about the longer term outcomes of this, anyone who says they've got the answers is not someone to believe. And I think, all these factors depend on, psychology, the reaction of government, as well as how the actual, crisis plays out from a health point of view. I always think it's most helpful to kind of cut it into short-term and long-term impacts. And I think in the short term, what we've seen from our tenant base and from the conversations I've had in the market is it's a real spread. Some tenants want to bring in their workforce back into the office pretty quickly, partly because of their culture or because of the senior leaders in that business are really anchored to that. Or because of the type of work they do, I suppose is really benefits from having that human collaboration. Other companies have already made the decision that they're not going to come back into the office until 2021, and you see all of the range, of kind of different options and spectrum within that. I think when people do start coming in, it's obviously going to be a transition for everyone, and our role as office landlords ultimately is to make sure it's as anyone coming in feels as safe and as comfortable as possible as they can, particularly within the space that we control, which tends to be the common areas, the lobbies, the elevators, and so on. And then being really clear in our communication and collaboration with tenants about how they're communicating to their employees about the broader building and what they're doing within their workplaces. I think just really echoing some of the comments that Charles and Carol made.
This brings us to an interesting point. How will the office itself physically change? What do you think yourselves and your tenants will have to bring in terms of distancing, in terms of cleaning and hygiene and things like this? Is the office going to look considerably different in 2 years' time from how it did 2 years ago?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think 2 years is a really interesting kind of point in time, because that's kind of between the short term and the long term. I think in the short term, what we've generally seen is tenants are taking out desks and moving to kind of much lower density models in terms of within their workplace. Similarly, I think the pieces around greater flexibility, greater ability to kind of move into space and plug and play, rather than necessarily needing to hire a whole real estate team to manage that workplace, particularly for kind of SMEs. I think that trend of landlords becoming kind of workplace partners to smaller companies is definitely going to be there. But on the other side, for larger companies, they're very keen that we provide the best way for their employees to access their workspace, and then they're very keen to take control of exactly what the procedures are going on within their space as a kind of corporate policy. So again, it's really great range. I'm sure we'll get into further conversations later about what's the actual role of the office in the longer term, which I think is probably more about if you can work from anywhere, what's the marginal added value for actually being in person to person with a group of people, and what locations are going to facilitate that in the future versus where they are now. But certainly in the short term, it's as I said, I think it'll be a spectrum across different tenants, and the emphasis is really on I think taking things slowly, deliberately, and with kind of a true purpose behind it.
Mm-hmm. Sean, you help your clients with business strategies. How does the provision of office space and how it's used, how is it incorporated into the strategy, and how has that changed in the last few weeks and looking ahead to the future?
So first of all, I think we're all in contextual learning. So I think Giles put it well, these are about 2-week increments of incremental learning as to how to deal with unprecedented times. So when we split the problem, we're looking through the lens of the employees and the employers, and they're very different drivers. Last night, many people may have caught the debate that was occurring on Sky News about the future of work and the future of, beyond the pandemic. And I thought was very telling was the compelling real-time surveys that they were doing with the digital audience. And when asked if they felt that the government and governments were returning to normal, whatever that new reality is, as fast or faster than they would like. So the question was, is it fast enough? Nearly 80% of the audience when polled said, we're going to take it slower than what the government is advising. So that's a key influencer on how work will return to the new reality when there's an imbalance between what the employer wants to do and what the employee actually really wants to do. The second driver, I think, to timing is the different mechanisms across the world to synthetically enable employment. In the US, it's done in a manner that's compelling, very straightforward. You're basically furloughed or unemployed, but you're paid a sum equivalent to roughly around where you were paid before, and less plus or minus. Where in Europe, the employer delivers that and sets that up. So I think one of the biggest fears that employers have when judging about space that we're talking to is what the truth is. So it's hard to calibrate against, laws, trust, transparency, and, the basic right to freedom to decide whether you want to put yourself at risk. And that's an unknown at this point. And then the last point I'd make on how to fundamentally decide what capacity, because there's overcapacity in offices right now, is what is the zombie job fallout when all the government furlough and payment mechanisms end in a couple of months' time? What will be the real population of an employer at that stage? So these are staged, contextual, traumatic conversations that employers are adjusting to even have this conversation. So that's what we're spending a lot of time on, both the psychology of it, the practicality of it, the trust, transparency, and the fear element that employers also have to deal with.
Just to chip in very quickly, I just want to say, on that employee point in particular, I think what's quite funny to an extent is historically the remote work and flexibility around working from home has been largely driven by the younger cohorts within businesses and the digital natives, whereas now actually in return to work, some of that's going to be reversed. And you've got the older cohorts who are, particularly in London, for example, living outside in larger houses, spending time with their family with a whole room dedicated to a home office. And on the flip side, you've got people more in my position in kind of central London working out of their bedrooms from a laptop, who will be a lot happier to go back to work, I suppose, maybe on a slightly faster schedule. And obviously there's, greater levels of risk, or smaller levels of risk for younger people and older people as well. But it's interesting how it's reversed.
One of the things that I have gleaned from speaking to several people who live in my area, which is about a 45-minute train journey to London, is that people aren't so worried about being in the office. It's the commute to get there that is really deterring them. The idea of being on a packed train or a packed tube is not attractive at all at the moment. I was wondering if you guys thought that staggered working hours will become the standard way of doing things, rather than a 9-to-5 job and trying to get everybody in at the same time. Giles, you're waving. Do you want to pick up?
I think we have to be careful in this discussion not to conflate the two issues. One is it's dangerous getting to work and we're worried about getting to work. And on the other hand is, how is it going to change work in the future once we're past COVID? As we know, this has been one of the most successful communications in history from the government about staying at home. Only almost caught up by Thatcher's Don't Die of Ignorance with the AIDS campaign. So today, in terms of, if I can answer some of the points you've said so far, the office is changing very quickly today. And I went into some of our offices yesterday. We have signs up, we have 2 meters separation, 2 people on a lift, sanitizer everywhere, sneeze screens at the desk. We've offered all our clients sneeze screens at their desk. But we're not doing anything that can't be turned around and changed very quickly, because it is our assessment. This is all likely to be very short term. And if you go to the 2-year question you answered earlier, and going back to what I premised all this, obviously prophecy was not given to man, but in 2 years, the office will look like it looked before COVID, because we've got to have to learn to live with COVID. And the other thing quickly, all the decisions that are being made in the context of fear. Go outside your house and you will die. Once that goes away, and once people realize that, and I was interviewed yesterday, so I did some real-time investigation about deaths of COVID. Below, and I know probably all of you have done this, but below 65 years of age, 4,849 people have died with COVID in the UK. Now, not taking away from how serious any death is, that's a tiny amount, and that's pretty well the whole of the workforce in the UK. So the issue was around keeping people at home, so the NHS. Once we have got more data about COVID, and I think, by the way, the government had no choice but to lock us down, given the pressures from you and political pressure. But we've got a grasp on all this data, and we can have this discussion without fear. Then we have to discuss, what do people get out of the office? And the office is greater than the sum of its parts. And moving the conversation a little bit to that is, what do we do in the office? Well, we collaborate, we create ethos, we mentor, we train, we meet our partners and lovers, we socialise afterwards, do our sport, we go to bars, we go to restaurants, we have culture. Now, all that is a massive part of why we go into the office. And I do not believe that we're going to give that up full time to work at home. Rant over.
Who'd like to pick up on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's just some context. We are social animals. We're tribal. We don't like to be ostracized. We like to be picked for the team. If we're not picked for the team, we want to know why. So, there's that natural tendency to be that. I think the question, though, is not so much about our tribal instincts and our need for being social. If I put on an employer hat, there's a whole new sense of liability. And yes, I agree with Giles, somewhere in the future, things may return to something, but there is a new reality for a reasonable amount of time that, is probably the largest change window imposed by a invisible heathen that we've seen. So what are some of the possible outcomes of that? People have learned to do this, what we're doing right now. There's a whole new population that have had you know, the Zoom experience of, you know, I can't connect right now, you didn't send me the email, I couldn't get connect, you know, all of that, right? There's a whole new population that have discovered how to work in this environment and how not to have your laundry hanging behind you when you're on a customer call. So all of these new skills have come into play. And, you know, this is an opportunity for both parties to reestablish the social structure between, you know, three parties, the government, business, employers, and employees. And there's enough groundswell right now that some employees will say, I want to work from home. So that's not all employees, but that could be a permanent component of how work has to change. And I'm probably broadening it to what work is as opposed to what the office is. And, you know, in the next 2 years, one way or the other, there's, you know, in 2008, the CFO called the shots. I think in 2020, it's HR and risk management that are calling the shots for a short window. I'm not saying that it's 2 years. I don't know what that is, but certainly now through a number of months. So the question then is, how will they deal with that risk, and what is structural and what is temporary? And that puts a lot of pressure on managing real estate, and whether you're in a temporary office or you're working in shifts and you're on 3 weeks, 3 days and 2 days at home, or whatever this comes, it's going to be bespoke, but it's also a white collar problem. You know, when you look at manufacturing and you broad this out, what are their travel patterns to stay and use an office elsewhere? What are their travel patterns that'll evolve with Carol's business when, you know, who travels to where, and what about all the accommodation folks that are on this call that have a new predictability analysis to throw into their yield management, because everybody's not a white collar worker. And so I think we're talking about white collar workers versus, you know, the rest of the population, and that workspace is changing dramatically, just broadening it a little bit. So I'll pause there.
Okay, well, let's
just stirring it up a bit, you know. I know you're going talking to the government tomorrow.
Let's leave the office for a moment and talk about travel and business travel, because obviously it's more or less come to a standstill in recent weeks, and from what I can see, it's not going to pick up in any major way soon. Carol, can you give us an overview of how you see business travel restarting, and some, it's going to have to be approximate timescales?
Well, I think I kind of going back to something that Sean said, and the whole 2-week window thing. I'm kind of sitting with Sean in that I think that it's really fluid, and that things are forever changing. And, you know, I see a lot of people, you know, writing chapter and verse, and this is going to be the new way and the new Bible. But no sooner have you put the letters on the paper, it's changing. I also agree that, you know, at this moment in time, two things that have been said that I agree with. One is that people are now making decisions based on fear and how they're feeling today. And in a month's time, 2 weeks' time, a year's time, they'll see things probably different, because the guidelines would have changed, the goalposts would have changed, and they'll be looking at things a lot differently. Jack also mentioned about, you know, the younger generation being in little flats at home and wanting to get back to the office because of the space and, you know, maybe better technology and being able to interact with their peers. And I think from a travel perspective, I almost feel that that's probably going to be a similar thing in terms of when people start traveling again. It will be like the sales team, the younger team that are really keen to get on those planes and get moving. And those older people with families and, you know, more sort of thinking about, you know, my age, my health, etc., will probably think twice about, you know, jumping on and off planes. That said, from where I'm sitting as a global travel manager, what I'm asked to do is to look at, you know, how do we look today and what should we be thinking about in the future? And that comes in not only in terms of, you know, what will our travellers look like, so the numbers, where should they be travelling, who should be travelling, how often they should be travelling, and setting some policy and criteria around that. And of course, looking at how we can sustain the low levels of carbon emissions, how we can reduce our costs, and the duty of care and health and safety of our travellers. travellers. And the duty of care and health and safety is difficult because it's very sort of emotive. And I don't know which of our travellers has underlying issues, for example. So we may say you can travel to a particular country, it's no longer on lockdown, there's no quarantine, and you can go off and travel, but COVID is still out there. They then become ill, so how do we manage that? You know, are we covered? What's our liabilities? So there's lots of things to think about, and it's got to be both parties thinking about it. So it's the company thinking about the well-being and care of their travellers, and it's the travellers saying, well, am I actually prepared to do that? And it's a real melting pot in trying to make a decision as, will these numbers increase, or will they stay flat, or will they significantly drop? And, you know, as Sean says, it's ever changing. In 2 weeks' time, someone will say, well, I'm happy to travel, but today they've said, no, I'm not, because the guidelines have changed, because things are different. There's a lot more transparency, there's a lot more safety, there's a lot more tracking. The other thing is that there will be, I think there'll be lots more things that travellers will be expected to do, like, you know, visas, forms to be completed. So the whole way of travelling is going to change, and as a buyer, we have to be mindful of that and address those things as they happen, on the confines of, is it okay to travel? What's happening in the location? Who is travelling? Do they need to be there? And set some boundaries and criteria around that. And if they are going to travel, what is it that they need to do? And give them sufficient information so that they are comfortable, they're safe, and we've mitigated the risk as much as we possibly can. But I think, you know, like the whole thing about people coming back to work, I think travel is exactly the same. And when will people start traveling again? We're seeing in the market that the leisure people are already jumping on planes or wanting to jump on planes and go on their holidays. I don't quite see the corporates being exactly the same. And the reason I say that is, as long as we have the restrictions that are currently in place, so the quarantines, etc., businesses are not going to be approving for their travellers to travel. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we will not send people out there. If that changes, then we will look at it on a case-by-case basis. But at the moment, as long as there's restrictions, the 14-day quarantine when you come back to London, our companies will reconsider the travel. And if there's quarantine when you're traveling, based on our long-term travel average 7 days and our short-term 2 to 3 days, we're not going to send someone out on a short-term trip for a 14-day quarantine. So until that changes, I'm afraid there's not going to be a lot of movement from our house anyway.
And Carol, you said when there is, it's likely to be fewer trips but longer trips, so people can do more in one trip and
exactly
the risk.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that we're looking at. So when we do start traveling, we're going to be looking at how often people travel. The community that we're going to go after first of all is probably the internal travellers, so non-client facing travellers, and get an understanding of why they need to travel and set some criteria around that. For those people that do need to travel overall, both front facing, and we will say optimise on the trip. So rather than doing 2 to 3 days, we say stay a week and make best use of your time. If you're going long haul, make use of the circle fares. So instead of doing Hong Kong and back, then Singapore and back, do a round trip, do your China, your Hong Kong, your Singapore together, stay longer, optimize on that trip, do more. In that way, we can track and trace a lot better. You're doing a lot less travel, so it's a lot better for you in terms of your well-being and your health. You're able to spend more time with your staff and your clients and make better use of the time. And it also saves on the whole emissions piece in terms of trying to reduce that. So they're the sort of things that we're looking at. So it will be a whole new way of traveling. There'll be less travel, but people will stay longer. So those people that are in the accommodation world, someone like Fidelity, they'll absolutely love, because they'll see their room nights increasing. But for the airlines, we will probably see that the spend with them will flatten out, because we will be doing less but longer stays. And the expectation is that somewhere along the line, we will probably see numbers increasing in terms of cost of flights, because if airlines are restricted, they still need to manage their planes, they still need to pay for those planes, so the likelihood is that someone's going to be hit.
Yeah,
that's my rant.
Longer trips and the ability to self-isolate and cook for yourself would suggest that the type of accommodation that people are going to be booking will change as well, and will move more to the service department model. Do you think that is going to be echoed by your travellers, Carol?
I do. I think that our policy is anything that's 5+ that should go into a service department if it's available. And I think, you know, that in terms of people feeling safe, being, you know, having that isolation, being able to manage their own food, etc., etc. I think that there will be a bigger shift towards use of service departments than hotels. But that said, it really depends on how the hotels change in terms of the processes and procedures they put in place to safeguard their clients. And they almost going to have to become an apart hotel, where they're a combination between a service department and a hotel in managing, you know, delivery of food, how they look after the space, if people have to be quarantined, how they manage that, etc. So I think for us, a lot of our people, where it's available, will be moved towards more service departments than hotels.
Mm-hmm. Sean, one of the ways of working and travelling that has probably had more column inches in zeitgeisty websites over the last few years than most is the digital nomad, the famous digital nomad. Is that lifestyle and way of working still tenable at the moment, or are these guys going to have to put their laptop bags down for a few months before they continue that particular way of working?
So everything's changed, and you know, I'm a fan of George Carlin, and he said, you know, just when they discovered the meaning of life, they changed it. So you know, so we got changed, and so I think we're slowly, if not we're slowly, I mean in 2-week increments, becoming mostly digital nomads. I think it's evidenced by, you know, maybe 400 people on this call. And as I saw some people flash in, none of them are working in an office. So we've all discovered how to be digital nomads. So a couple of things. I think the digital nomad, and let's define, just for the sake of the example, YouTubers that are professional YouTubers, and they're going around the world doing, you know, either hiking, you know, videos or whatever. That's not going to change. And probably, you know what, most of us have got addicted to stuff like that courtesy of YouTube by being locked up. So the second bucket is those that are influencers, right? So the influencer market is probably going to change for the considerable future, because they generally are motivated by products, or they have the ability anyway to work around the world like coders. So I don't think that'll change. I think we're going to have a new generation of not nomadic digital people, but more along the lines of part-time digi-nomads working from their homes or other places. The third bucket that I think is there is, you know, maybe large chunks of time working remotely, especially if you've got a rural second home, or you have that privilege to do that. You know, so there's going to be different categories, but I think the technology has become the best thing that's come out of this. It's democratized wide-scale digital communication, and that is freeing. Talk about a paradox, right? That is absolutely freeing. And so now it's a question of, and then the last point I'd just like to add, George, is for employers and employees to have the ability to have a meaningful and open, empathetic discussion about what they as an individual want to do as they return to work, as Jack said, about cohort type and not stereotyping the workforce, and doing the best possible thing we can do to have meaningful one-on-one conversations to ease people back into a workforce, especially as we face large quantities of unemployment.
Just to add into that, if I can, 'cause I think I agree. I think the way we're thinking about each of the office, not to bring it back too much to the office, but that it's going to be one of several options, rather than previously it was, you know, more of a binary distinction. And whether one of that is your HQ in the center of town, which we still believe people will certainly, companies will certainly want and need. The quality emphasis there is probably going to be more on quality than on quantity on that HQ. We're probably going to see a move towards more satellite offices in the longer term, and more opportunities to bring people together, whether that's on a sub-market basis and having a few offices dotted around, maybe a more suburban office, let's say, in the US and Europe, or whether that's on a city basis as well. And so, a new opportunity to, if you're a company in California, to tap into the talent base, the lower, higher quality of life and lower cost of talent that there is in Austin, for example, or Phoenix. And I think really, the world really, and what technology does is it unbundles services, and it unbundles our perception of what was previously quite set. And I think this, what we've been referring to COVID as internally, is great accelerator. And so all of these trends that we're already seeing in the market, largely cities becoming more polycentric, companies having to, I suppose, being more led by their HR departments and their employees rather than the CFO, move towards flexibility and plug and play, and real estate being an outsourced function rather than an in-house function. I think this has been a great opportunity for everyone to take a breath, take a bit of a reset, and be thinking, now we're going to have the change management problem anyway of bringing people back to work. So if we were going to design this from the ground up, how do we design it in a kind of sustainable, future-proof way going forward? And I think the same thing in terms of diversity of where people work, is that satellite, HQ, at home, on the go. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for HR, for HR side and for business culture. And that is where I think things go in swings, and the pendulum swings too far one way and then probably too far back the other way. And I do think that, if we're measuring productivity, then I think remote work has certainly been a success in terms of the experiment. But in terms of longer term business change and innovation, if you look at why IBM brought back all of their employees into the office in 2015, it wasn't because they saw the productivity had started falling off, because they needed to rebuild the company and turn the company around from an innovation and culture perspective. And so I do think it's, I can see us the pendulum swinging a bit far back the other way and then coming back to the center again.
Do you think this presents an opportunity for a repurposing of some office space which perhaps won't be needed, particularly in, you mentioned perhaps if the central company HQs are scaled down, this offers companies such as yourselves, landlords, a chance to repurpose that space and move into more kind of multi-use developments?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, generally a trend that was already happening was the move towards mixed-use environments. And I think the big office block where 99% of all of that is just standard office, that's going to start feeling like the old way of doing things very quickly. I certainly think there's a lot of retail space that's going to need to be repurposed, and that's an opportunity on more of the satellite side, and we're looking at that across our portfolio. And then, I think on the office side, I think, again, it's offering that whole range of options to tenants, whether that's a pure co-working flex option, or a plug and play lease on flexible terms, or something more traditional. And I think ultimately you're going to have to, as a landlord and as anyone on the kind of landlord side, offering tenants a range of options is going to become more important, because quite simply I think not the genie's out of the bottle, but I think historically landlords have been able to have enough market power that just offering a binary kind of take it or leave it solution on the traditional side is now giving way to really have to focus on offering a whole range of things that tenants want.
George, if I might add to that, all office space is not created equal, as we know. There's grade A and keep going down the alphabet. One of the biggest issues that is testing people is the awareness of air quality. And so when you combine that, and I'm talking multiple jurisdictions, not just the UK, is, there's wider awareness of the quality of the air in the office, not just the distancing from my co-worker, but when people are beginning to understand the notion of what HEPA is and a HEPA filter, and that airplanes are HEPA enabled, whereas many offices are not. So, one of the competitive edges to define the new office is quality of air and then the flow of people through the building, at least in the medium term. The second bucket is when you talk about reshaping offices, where are the employees going to bring their children if schools have changed how they work and operate, if the commutes are different, if their spouse is on an alternate shift, if you will, inverted commas, than the other spouse. So it may be the time for co-working and other spaces like that to start to adjust to enabling, if they are doing a hybrid, a space that you can co-work in a way that wasn't done before, and that actually starts to fill some space because now there's demand. So these kind of unique additions, food service will be important, that's deliverable as opposed to, so it's pick up in a bag as opposed to standing in line. So all of these multi-use functions inside office buildings are real opportunities for landlords to optimize. The last point I'd say is we are facing statistically unknown waters when it comes to unemployment. Yet, when you think of office space, it's a high probability that you have to fill, if you have 100 employees and 50 are working at home, but if you have 50, and so you have 50 at work, 50 at home, they probably have to consume the same exact amount of office space because of distancing. So do costs go up? So how is that going to work, even with plexiglass? So there's some questions out there, and Giles is dying to get in and say the Irish guy is an idiot. So I'm going that way.
Yeah. I've stayed very quiet for me for a long time. I agree with what a lot of you and Jack and Karen have said. The office space is changing and has been changing. And for instance, our Monument Centre, we have bedrooms, we have nail and hair bar, a conference space, we have a bar, we have food. And we plan to do bigger buildings with more of all that sort of stuff, and creches. I wasn't quite sure what you were saying when the way that schools work changed. We're still conflating the issues, which we mustn't. We're saying, what are we going to do about all the stuff while we're in COVID, and then how's it going to look in the future? They're different issues. How it looks in COVID and how it looks in the future are different. I just want to say a couple of things in terms of, if I was coming to work as a graduate from a great university with a great degree, I was looking for a job, and you said to me, come and work at this company, and we're going to give you £1,000 spend on your desk at home, as you were going to do, and you're going to work from home. Or, as I did when I was a young apprentice, you said that you're going to come to this office, you look after, you're going to shadow this person who is already successful and articulate and is keen to teach you stuff. I absolutely know which job I'm going to choose. So God help those businesses who are going to take their young graduates and put them at home. Be a nightmare. We've already talked about IBM, Bank of America, Yahoo, sent all their staff home, brought them all back and say it wasn't about productivity. But remember what you call productivity, their ethos and culture fell apart. They weren't there feeding the culture and ethos. And that comes back to what I was saying about being the sum of the parts. And what else did I want to rant about? Oh yeah, we're already living in an environment where we are willing to risk the bombs of the 80s, bombs of Al-Qaeda, stabbings on London Bridge. We're already willing to travel abroad and perhaps get malaria and a plethora of other unpleasant illnesses when we travel. Now, I don't know if I mentioned, only less than 5,000 people, less than the age of 55, died with COVID. So we're already taking this risk on a day-to-day basis, and we will get over this. And then we've got to look at, once we've got over it, how does that best work? Now, we're talking about the digital nomad, last point we tried to hear. By the way, hi, Ricky. Hi, Giles. I just wanted to find the digital nomad. The digital nomad had total freedom to work wherever they wanted to, worked in the coffee houses of London. And then when they were full, they worked in WeWork. That's where they want to work. They want to work in an environment with other people where they can collaborate and be part of the herd as we all want to be.
Thanks, Giles. Okay, so before we go on quickly to some questions for our attendees, I just want to ask each of you very quickly, 1 year from now, how many days a week do you think you'll each be going into your office? Giles?
3.
Sean?
I'm going to try and stay where I am as long as I can because I'm having fun. So mine is out, not in. So invariably, the question would be, would I be on planes? Yes, I will be.
Carol?
I probably want to spend more time at home now, but 2 to 3.
And Jack?
Yeah, I go for 4.5, probably.
Okay, thanks guys. Right, we've got some questions.
Unless Sean gives me a spare bedroom in his house.
Jack, you're in. There's no problem. And we have a bar ready for you. You're fine.
And if I'm sitting in St. Lucia, I won't be coming to the office at all.
Fair play to you, Carol.
So from the sublime to, I won't say the ridiculous, but the first question is about the conference and meeting space, and it's from Michael Zager at Hospitality 360. Even if air travel is back, how will the expected reduced travel frequency impact the conference and meeting business, and therefore also the service department sector going forward? Sean, do you want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, the events business is fascinating in the sense of the impact on that. Wrote a piece about this recently, and let's separate this between the service department side and the events side. The events side will have to go through a immense change, and I just want to separate something what Giles commented on is that the difference between what we're talking about is medium term. It's not about whether it's COVID free or not or tribal. It's more about the timeline to stability of perception as much as what the reality is, as you pointed out. And the same thing applies to the event space. And so if you just divide that, the event space in a hotel, major hotel versus public space like the Excel, have relatively different problems. And they have to adjust considerably, again, based on trust and based on travel policy. So they are way down the food chain when it comes to opening up in comparison to, because they're relying on leaders and Carol's colleagues to make decisions as to whether they're allowed to go to that event based on risk management. The second bucket is that hotels need to learn from this and embrace digital, embrace taking 2 walls of a ballroom and turning them into massive LED panels and being able to host this with a real live population as well. And so there's some serious adaptation that has to across the event space, and that is merely a cursory scrape of the complexity that's there. And it goes into weddings, it goes into everything in our life as to how that happens. And that's possibly a short-term issue, but it's a real issue short-term for every economy. The second thing then regarding service departments, and I think you brought up the question about who will the winners be here. I think it's the alternatives to the hotels. And even within the hotels, there's all are not created equal. Some of our clients are economy hotels with exterior corridors. They're winning because they don't have to go down corridors and lifts. It's interesting how it shifts. Luxury is winning because they can transfer the cost to their clients and build in the expectation of trust into their models. So the service departments and other appeared, a distancing. The other group is, believe it or not, are boat hotels, are in town harbors where you can go on Airbnb and get a really cool boat, and you're right in the middle of town and you're completely distanced and you get all the deliveries. So there's all these new ways to accommodate this problem until there is a sustained trust that C-19 is not a threat, inverted commas, to me.
I'd like to talk about technology briefly. We've had a question from Javier Aguirre about whether smart home technology, such as controlling lights and HVAC with detectors and the user's phone and this kind of thing, is going to become more prevalent in office I guess they are in new builds, but also in refurbs. And I'd like to broaden that and ask about proptech, software, this kind of thing. What advances are we going to see in technology in the working environment going forward? Jack, would you like to pick up on that one?
Yeah, I can give you both. I mean, I think, again, dividing it into the short-term COVID and long-term, or even 3 buckets quickly. But I think the short-term back to work is being done, as Giles said, not with necessarily fancy technology and services, but with, you know, the foolproof, easy to implement, but critical measures like tape on the floor and hand sanitizer and screens and so on. Beyond that, we definitely see more demand, you know, over the next year plus in terms of people gradually getting their occupancy in those offices back to some level. I think, you know, more demand for touchless technologies, certainly, which is probably a shorter term one, through to, you know, integration into security. So you've got mobile access, through to air quality sensors and better HVAC filtering, and just generally collecting more data on the workplace and on the building. So we definitely think it's going to be an accelerator for them. Those technologies, I think the question again will be who takes the lead on that? Is that landlords or is that tenants themselves? And it probably depends on the building and the landlord and the tenant, where that comes in. But again, when I think about medium and long-term trends in this environment, I don't think you can do much more than say directionally where it's going to go. And are we going to, you know, collect less data about how our office space is used going forward? No, it has to be more about actually understanding what this future of the office is, if that makes sense. So yeah, I definitely think that will come in, and I think the same at home in terms of smart homes and your smart, you know, your smart home office, as it were.
Great, thanks, guys. So it really does seem that there is the short term and the long term are going to be quite different. The consensus appears to be that although things will change, we will still be going to the office. The water cooler moment is not a thing of the past. You'll be glad to hear. Thanks for taking part, guys. It's been a really interesting conversation. Just before we wrap up, just want to run through a couple of slides, and we'll be putting the link for the next webinar, there you go, which takes place in 2 weeks' time. This is about investor sentiment towards various hospitality and real estate asset classes. As you can see, we've got some great speakers on that one. With us on this call today, we've had a really interesting mix of attendees, actually. We've had investors, operators, suppliers, lawyers, consultants, a really broad church, and I anticipate that will continue throughout the series. Justin, if we could go forward, please. So as I mentioned at the start, these webinars are a precursor to a great new event that we're launching in London in November, the Urban Living Festival. It's based around the convergence of various hospitality and real estate classes and how everything is starting to overlap. It's going to have a festival feel. It's going to have 3 stages, which are themed stay, live and work. And we're really excited about it. It's going to be a fantastic event, and I hope to see plenty of you there. If you want to find out more about that, the website is allthewsurbanlivingfestival.com. And as we've been talking about business travel today, and we've got some buyers on the call and in the audience, part of the Urban Living Festival, Justin, could you just go back a sec, please? We've got an element of it called Engage, which is a forum specifically for travel buyers. It's a half-day interactive session which will be part of ULF. I really recommend, if you're in the business travel sector, to go along to that. Okay, next one please, Justin. These are the sponsors already confirmed for ULF. A few familiar names there. Thanks to all you guys. If you are interested in exhibiting or sponsoring, please contact my colleague Katie. All her details are on there. As I said earlier, there is a recording of this webinar available, which will be emailed to everybody who has registered. There is a timetable for the next few. As you can see, we're covering lots of different hospitality and real estate asset classes. They're all going to have great speakers, and they're all going to be extremely informative. So I hope to see lots of you back for the next one and for future ones. Thanks very much, panelists. Thanks to you all for listening, and see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.